The morning sun bathed the quiet settlement in a golden hue, its rays stretching lazily over the small weathered homes scattered across the land. This was a place untouched by the galaxy's grand battles, where time moved slower and life was simpler. Yet in this remote and peaceful corner of the galaxy, an event was about to unfold that would shake the foundations of the mighty Galactic Empire. Mara Hales knelt in her modest garden, her hands stained with the soil she had lovingly cultivated for years. Her silver hair caught the sunlight, framing a face that carried the marks of a life well lived. To her neighbors, she was more than an elderly gardener. She was a pillar of wisdom, her quiet strength an anchor for the community. Her gentle demeanor and kind smile masked an unspoken pain, a son lost to the Empire, a bond fractured by time and choices. Mara's son, Kevin Hales, was no ordinary man. Far removed from the simple life of his mother, he had risen through the ranks of the Galactic Empire, now a feared and ruthless general commanding fleets and legions. Yet, even the powerful armor of his rank couldn't shield him from the ghosts of his past, the haunting memories of a mother who once begged him to choose another path. For years, the divide between them had grown, a chasm as vast as the galaxy itself. As Mara worked in her garden, the distant hum of engines grew louder. She paused, her hands stilling in the dirt as her sharp eyes turned toward the sky. A shadow loomed, blocking out the sun, and the familiar outline of an Imperial cruiser came into view. Fear rippled through the settlement as the massive ship descended, its presence a harbinger of doom. Villagers gathered, their voices hushed whispers of dread. The ship's engines roared like an approaching storm, and soon drop ships streaked through the sky, landing with precision on the outskirts of the settlement. Armored soldiers poured out, their polished boots crushing the earth beneath them as they moved with mechanical efficiency. Their blasters gleamed under the sunlight, their black uniforms stark against the vibrant hues of the land. Mara rose slowly, wiping her hands on her apron, her heart steady despite the fear swirling around her. The villagers watched in tense silence as a tall officer stepped forward, his cold eyes sweeping over the crowd. His voice, sharp and authoritative, cut through the uneasy murmurs. By order of the Galactic Empire, this settlement is to be searched for contraband and evidence of treasonous activity. Cooperation will ensure your safety. Resistance will not be tolerated. The soldiers moved swiftly, breaking into homes, overturning belongings, and ransacking lives with chilling indifference. Cries of protest echoed, but they were met with silence, or worse, the threatening hum of a blaster rifle. Mara watched it all, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She could see the fear in her neighbor's eyes, the helplessness that came with standing against an unstoppable force. When two soldiers approached her home, Mara stepped forward, blocking their path. Her voice was calm but firm, a quiet defiance that startled even herself. "This is my home," she said. "There's nothing inside worth your trouble." One of the soldiers sneered. "Step aside, old woman, or we'll make you." Mara's gaze did not falter. "You'll find nothing of value here. Only memories and a lifetime of work. If you destroy it, you'll gain nothing but shame." The commotion drew the officer's attention. He strode over, his boots crushing the flowers Mara had nurtured with care. He stopped in front of her, towering over her small frame. "You dare obstruct an Imperial search?" he asked, his tone laced with disdain. Mara's chin lifted, her resolve unwavering. "I dare to stand for what's mine." A tense silence fell over the settlement, the air heavy with anticipation. The officer's expression darkened, and he drew his sidearm. "Defiance is treason," he declared, raising the weapon. The villagers gasped, their fear spilling into the open, but Mara stood her ground. Her eyes, unyielding and full of quiet strength, met the officer's without flinching. A single shot rang out, and Mara crumpled to the ground. Her blood seeped into the soil she had tended with love, a tragic symbol of the Empire's merciless grip. The officer holstered his weapon without a second glance, barking orders to resume the search. The villagers were too stunned to move, their silent grief a heavy weight that hung in the air. But amidst the chaos, a young boy in the crowd activated a small holocorder, capturing every moment of the atrocity. Far away, aboard the Imperial flagship *Erebus*, General Kevin Hales sat in his quarters, reviewing reports. His sharp features were illuminated by the soft glow of a holographic screen, his mind occupied with the routine matters of the Empire, skirmishes, resource requisitions, and raids on rebellious colonies. But as his eyes scanned a particular report, he froze. The location listed matched his mother's settlement. The details were brief, clinical: suppression of a potential uprising, death of an uncooperative colonist. No names were mentioned, but Kevin felt a chill run through him. He tapped the screen, his heart pounding as dread coiled tightly around his chest. In his mind, the scene played out vividly: a nameless officer, an unarmed woman. He refused to believe it, yet deep down he knew. Memories of his mother flooded his mind: her laughter, her wisdom, the warmth of her embrace. He remembered her pleading with him to leave the Empire, to find another path, but he had dismissed her words, blind to the darkness he now realized surrounded him. A knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. He barked a command to enter, and an aide stepped in, saluting sharply. "Sir, we've received an intercepted transmission from the Resistance. It's graphic." "Show me," Kevin ordered, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. The aide hesitated before activating the holoprojector. The grainy recording played, and Kevin watched as the events of his mother's settlement unfolded before his eyes. The crowd, the officer, the shot, the old woman lying lifeless in the dirt. Kevin's chest heaved as he fought to contain the storm of emotions threatening to consume him. Anger, guilt, grief. Each one burned within him, demanding retribution. He dismissed the aide with a curt nod, his voice barely steady. Alone once more, he stared at his reflection in the darkened viewport, his uniform a bitter reminder of the chains he had willingly donned. "This ends now," he muttered, the words a vow. For the first time in years, Kevin Hales allowed himself to grieve. But with the tears came a resolve stronger than any allegiance to the Empire. They had taken everything from him. Now he would take everything from them. As the stars outside twinkled with an eerie calm, Kevin's thoughts turned to the rebellion he would lead, the justice he would seek. The seeds of defiance had been planted, and the galaxy was on the brink of a storm it had never seen before. Kevin Hales didn't sleep that night. The image of his mother lying lifeless in the dirt played in an endless loop in his mind. He could still hear her voice in his memories, soft yet firm, always guiding him. But now that voice was gone, snuffed out by the very institution he had sworn to serve. As the ship sailed through the vast silence of space, Kevin remained in his quarters, staring out at the endless stars. The insignia of the Galactic Empire pinned to his chest felt heavier than ever before. For years he had climbed the ranks, convinced that power and loyalty to the Empire were the only paths to success. He had become the general they needed, efficient, ruthless, and unquestioning. But now doubt gnawed at him, unraveling the threads of his once unshakable resolve. The silence was broken by the chime of his communication terminal. Kevin's gaze shifted, and he hesitated before answering. The face of Admiral Tarek appeared on the screen, his expression as cold and calculating as ever. "General Hales," Tarek began, his tone clipped. "The incident at Nira Colony has been resolved. The officer in charge reports full compliance from the locals." Kevin's jaw tightened, his voice carefully neutral. "And the casualties?" Tarek raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the question. "Minimal. A single colonist resisted and was dealt with accordingly. A necessary demonstration of our authority." Kevin's grip on the edge of the console tightened, but he kept his expression unreadable. "Understood, Admiral. Is there anything else?" Tarek studied him for a moment, then gave a curt nod. "No. Carry on." As the screen went dark, Kevin leaned back in his chair, his heart pounding. The words "necessary demonstration" echoed in his mind. How many lives had he dismissed in the same way, reduced to numbers on a report? But this time was different. This time it was personal. He turned his attention to the intercepted transmission again. The recording had been sent to rebel cells across the galaxy, a rallying cry against the Empire's tyranny. Kevin replayed the video, studying every detail. The officer who fired the fatal shot was unfamiliar to him, a new recruit, likely eager to prove his loyalty through brutality. Kevin's fingers hovered over the console. A part of him wanted to erase the recording, to bury the evidence and pretend none of it had happened. But another part, the part that still remembered the lessons his mother had tried to teach him, refused to let it go. The rebellion was no longer just a distant threat to the Empire's rule. It was a growing force, fueled by the injustices Kevin had spent his career enforcing. And now, they had a weapon far more dangerous than any blaster or starship: his mother's death. As dawn broke over Nara Colony, the villagers gathered around Mara's small home. Her garden, once a place of life and beauty, now stood trampled and bloodstained. A young man named Elias, one of the few who had dared to record the incident, stood at the center of the crowd. "She was a mother to all of us," Elias said, his voice trembling with anger. "And they killed her without a second thought. We can't let this go unanswered." The crowd murmured in agreement, their fear giving way to a simmering rage. For years, they had lived under the Empire's shadow, their lives dictated by its oppressive rule. But now, something had changed. Mara's death had awakened a spark of defiance, one that could not be easily extinguished. Far above the planet, Kevin reviewed the Empire's latest intelligence reports. The rebellion was gaining traction, its leaders using incidents like Nira Colony to recruit new fighters. Each attack on the Empire was met with swift retaliation, but the cycle only seemed to strengthen the rebels' resolve. Kevin's thoughts drifted back to his mother's words the last time they had spoken. She had warned him that the Empire's power was built on fear and oppression, and that one day it would crumble under the weight of its own cruelty. At the time, he had dismissed her as naive, convinced that the Empire's strength was unshakable. But now he wasn't so sure. He accessed the Empire's personnel database, searching for the officer responsible for the raid on Nira Colony, Lieutenant Dax Renner. Kevin's jaw tightened as he read the officer's file. Young, ambitious, and loyal to a fault, everything the Empire valued in its soldiers. Kevin tapped his communicator. "Lieutenant Renner, report to my quarters immediately." When Renner arrived, he stood at attention, his posture rigid. "General Hales, sir, you requested me." Kevin studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You were in charge of the raid on Nira Colony." "Yes, sir," Renner replied, his voice steady. "The mission was a success. We secured the area and neutralized any potential threats." "Neutralized," Kevin repeated, his tone cold. "You mean you executed an unarmed woman?" Renner's confidence wavered slightly. "She refused to comply, sir. I acted within protocol." Kevin rose from his chair, his towering presence intimidating even for a seasoned soldier. "Your protocol cost the Empire more than you realize. That woman was my mother." The blood drained from Renner's face. "General, I—" "Save it," Kevin snapped. "You acted without thought, without restraint, and now the entire galaxy knows about it. The rebels will use this against us, and it's your recklessness that gave them the ammunition." Renner's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. I didn't know, sir. If I had—" "It's too late for excuses," Kevin said, his voice like steel. "You've done irreparable damage. Dismissed." Renner saluted shakily and left the room, his steps unsteady. Kevin sank back into his chair, his mind racing. The anger he felt toward Renner was nothing compared to the guilt consuming him. He had spent years enforcing the Empire's will, turning a blind eye to its atrocities. How many families had he torn apart? How many lives had he destroyed? He knew what he had to do, but the path ahead was fraught with danger. To defy the Empire was to invite certain death, yet the thought of continuing to serve it was unbearable. Kevin's loyalty had been fractured, and in the cracks, a new purpose began to take shape. For the first time in his life, Kevin Hales wasn't thinking about orders or strategy. He was thinking about justice, not for himself, but for his mother, and for every life the Empire had destroyed. And he knew he couldn't do it alone. The rebellion was growing, and its leaders were becoming more organized with each passing day. Kevin would find them, offer his expertise, and use every resource at his disposal to dismantle the Empire from within. As he stared out at the stars, the weight of his decision settled over him. The road ahead would be perilous, and there was no guarantee of success. But for the first time in years, Kevin felt something he thought he had lost forever: hope. The days that followed were filled with restless urgency. Kevin's decision to abandon the Empire had not been made lightly, but now that the choice was clear, he had to act carefully. He could not simply walk away from his position without arousing suspicion. As a general, his every move was monitored, his every decision scrutinized by his superiors. The slightest misstep could mean his execution before he had the chance to make a difference. In the dark solitude of his quarters, Kevin began laying the groundwork for his departure. He needed to reach the rebels, but they were elusive, operating in the shadows to evade the Empire's iron grip. He remembered the transmission he had intercepted, the one that had revealed his mother's death to the galaxy. Somewhere out there, the person who sent that message was waiting. They had unknowingly become his lifeline. Kevin pulled up the recording again, his eyes scanning every detail. The audio was heavily encrypted, but the video showed glimpses of the Neura colony outskirts. He focused on the figure in the background. A young man with a handheld device, partially obscured by the crowd. It had to be Elias, the one who had risked everything to document the Empire's brutality. Kevin made a note to find him. Meanwhile, the Empire was already moving to suppress the fallout from the raid. Propaganda broadcasts painted Mara Hales as a rebel sympathizer, her death framed as an unfortunate but necessary act to maintain order. Kevin's stomach turned as he watched the lies unfold on the screen, his mother's face reduced to a tool for manipulation. Admiral Tarek's voice echoed through the halls as he addressed the fleet. The rebellion grows bolder with each passing day, but their actions only strengthen our resolve. We will not be swayed by their deceit or their cowardly tactics. The Empire remains unshaken. Kevin knew better. Beneath Tarek's confident facade lay a growing unease. The rebellion was no longer a scattered nuisance, it was becoming a coordinated force. And the cracks in the Empire's foundation were beginning to show. On Neura Colony, the villagers were facing their own struggles. The Empire's troops had pulled back, leaving a heavy presence of drones and surveillance systems in their place. Every movement, every conversation was monitored, creating an atmosphere of constant fear. Elias, however, refused to be silenced. In the dead of night, he crept through the abandoned alleyways, clutching the device he had used to record Mara's final moments. He had already sent the transmission to the rebels, but he knew the fight was far from over. The Empire would come for him eventually, and when they did, he had to be ready. Elias wasn't alone in his defiance. A small group of villagers had begun to organize, inspired by Mara's courage. They met in secret, whispering plans of sabotage and resistance. Among them was an older man named Jarek, who had lived through the Empire's occupation for decades. The Empire thrives on fear, Jarek told the group, his voice steady. If we can show them we're not afraid, we can take back what they've stolen from us. But not everyone was willing to take that risk. Some villagers argued that resistance would only bring more destruction, that survival depended on compliance. The divide among the colonists mirrored the larger struggle unfolding across the galaxy between those who fought for freedom and those who clung to the fragile stability the Empire provided. As the tension on Neura Colony simmered, Kevin took his first steps toward rebellion. Using his authority as a general, he accessed restricted files and rerouted small supplies of medical equipment and food to colonies suffering under the Empire's rule. It was a small gesture, but it was a start. In the midst of his covert efforts, Kevin received an unexpected visitor. Lieutenant Renner stood at his door, his expression hesitant. "General Hales, I need to speak with you," Renner said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. Kevin let him in, watching the younger officer carefully. Renner seemed nervous, his hands fidgeting at his sides. "I've been thinking about what you said," Renner began, avoiding Kevin's gaze. "About what happened on Neura Colony. I didn't know she was your mother, but it doesn't matter. What I did was wrong." Kevin crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "What are you asking me, Lieutenant?" Renner hesitated before answering. "I want to make it right, if there's anything I can do to help." Kevin's first instinct was to dismiss him. Renner's actions had caused irreparable harm, and trusting him now felt like a gamble. But as Kevin studied the younger man, he saw something he hadn't expected, genuine remorse. "If you're serious about helping," Kevin said slowly, "then you'll follow my orders without question, no matter how dangerous they might seem." Renner nodded, determination flickering in his eyes. "I'm ready, sir." Kevin wasn't sure if he believed him, but he was willing to take the risk. He needed allies, and if Renner could be turned, it would be one less enemy standing in his way. Back on Nera Colony, Elias and his group prepared for their first act of defiance. They had identified one of the Empire's surveillance drones, its constant presence a reminder of their oppression. Armed with nothing but makeshift tools and their wits, they planned to disable it and send a message that they would not be controlled. As the group gathered in the shadows, the tension was palpable. Each of them knew the consequences if they were caught, but the desire for freedom outweighed their fear. Elias took a deep breath, his heart pounding as he approached the drone. The plan was simple. A carefully placed electromagnetic pulse would disable its circuits long enough for them to dismantle it. But as he raised the device, the sound of approaching footsteps froze him in place. "Stop!" A voice commanded, sharp and authoritative. Elias turned to see a squad of Imperial soldiers, their blasters trained on him and his group. The rebels had been betrayed, but by whom they did not yet know. The struggle for freedom was far from over, and the stakes had just been raised.